Okay, so today we're diving into something, well, it's kind of heavy, honestly. We're talking about grandparents who are, for whatever reason, kept from seeing their grandkids.
Yeah. It's not exactly the picture-perfect grandparent-grandchild relationship that we usually think about.
Right. Like, we picture those warm, fuzzy connections, maybe some spoiling. But the reality is that's not always how it goes. And when that bond gets broken, it's, well, it's a big loss for everyone involved.
It's a huge loss, and it's becoming, unfortunately, more and more common. And the worst part is a lot of the time these grandparents haven't done anything wrong.
Absolutely. So in this deep dive, we're going to take a close look at this whole thing, this phenomenon of what's called grandparental alienation. And we're going to be using some current research to help us understand it. There's a really interesting Psychology Today article that we'll be pulling from. It's tough to get hard numbers on this because, well, it's such a personal, painful experience. But there is some research that suggests that it's on the rise. In fact, Joshua Coleman, he's a researcher just this year, he pointed out that with the way things are going, with more and more adult children cutting off contact with their parents, it only makes sense that we'd see this alienation of grandparents going up too.
And it's a specific kind of pain. It's often described as ambiguous loss. It's not like a death where there's that clear sense of finality, but it's this ongoing absence where the grandchild is very much alive but not accessible, and that leaves grandparents grieving for a relationship that was or could have been full of those special moments, those milestones. It's really a unique form of grief.
So you're saying it's more than just missing out on the day-to-day. It's like grieving for a whole future that's been taken away.
Exactly. And that future, for grandparents, often represents a kind of legacy. It's that sense of passing something down, of staying connected to the generations that come after you.
So how does this happen? How do things get to this point where grandparents are completely cut off?
Well, there's some fascinating research that sheds light on this. In 2024, Deggs White and a team of researchers surveyed over 500 grandparents who were experiencing this alienation. And they found some really eye-opening patterns in terms of the tactics that are used.
So they're actually like deliberate actions being taken to keep these grandparents away. That's just wild to me.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just accidental drifting apart. These are intentional strategies.
Wow. So what did they find? What are these tactics?
Okay, so one of the most common ones, like 95% of grandparents said they experienced this, is being denied information about their grandchildren. Think about that, not knowing how they're doing in school, how their soccer game went, just basic updates.
That's just heartbreaking. And it's so basic. Like as a parent, I share updates with my kids' grandparents all the time. It just seems natural.
Right. And then following closely behind that, at 94%, is the adult child controlling all contact. They become this gatekeeper, deciding when, if ever, the grandparents get to see the grandkids. And often those interactions are very limited, very controlled.
I mean, I can understand wanting to set some boundaries, but that just seems so extreme. Why would an adult child feel the need to go to those lengths?
It's complicated. The research mainly focuses on the experience of the grandparents, so we have to kind of read between the lines. But it could be anything from unresolved conflict between the adult child and the grandparent to a desire to create their own separate family unit to, in some cases, unfortunately, even trying to manipulate the grandparents in some way.
Yeah, I guess it's probably never just one thing. It's probably a whole mix of things from the past and the present all tangled up together.
Exactly. And the study found so many other tactics. Like 86% of the grandparents said they'd had their time with the grandkids manipulated. Things like last-minute cancellations or just creating these scheduling conflicts that make it impossible to see them.
So it's not even about saying no directly. It's about making it impossible.
Exactly. And then you've got 78% reporting emotional manipulation of the grandkids. Like the parent will actively try to turn the child against their grandparents.
Oh, man, that's just awful. Like to think that a child's perception of their own grandparents is being twisted like that.
Yeah, it's tough. And then there's the social media blackout. 77% of grandparents reported this. They're completely blocked from seeing any updates or pictures or anything about their grandkids online.
Which, again, makes sense in that whole control thing, right? It's
Yeah.
about controlling the narrative, making sure the grandkids only see a certain version of things.
Absolutely. And then it gets even worse. 74% of these grandparents said they were being badmouthed by their own child, like spoken about negatively to the grandkids. Oh, that's just so painful. And then there are those false allegations. That was reported by 72%. I mean, that's got to be devastating.
Totally. And there were other things too, like rejecting gifts, telling the grandkids to keep secrets from their grandparents, being interrogated after visits, threatening messages, even disrespect from the grandkids that seemed to be encouraged by the parents.
It's like a whole campaign, a systematic attempt to break down the relationship.
Yeah. And the thing is, the researchers didn't just look at how common these tactics were. They also wanted to understand which ones were the most damaging to the grandparents' well-being.
Right, because it's not just about how often they happen, it's about how much they hurt.
Exactly. And the ones that really stood out, the ones that seemed to cause the most lasting pain, were the ones that were most active and direct.
So, like, what specifically? Well, things like actually trying to brainwash the grandchild against the grandparent, the adult child directly putting down the grandparent, those false accusations, threatening communications, being completely cut off from any information, and being treated with disrespect by the grandchild. Those were the ones that really seemed to leave scars.
And it's so interesting because those are the ones where it's not just about control, it's about actively turning the grandchild against the grandparent.
Yeah, there's a real sense of manipulation and, honestly, cruelty in those tactics.
And the article talked about how this pain for grandparents is not just about the here and now, right? It's about the future, too, and how that gets taken away.
Exactly. And as we get older, that sense of the future, that connection to future generations, it becomes even more important. It's about legacy. It's about feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
And the study actually backs this up. They found a clear correlation between the number of alienation tactics a grandparent experienced and their overall life satisfaction. The more tactics, the less satisfied they were with life.
Yeah, it's like each one of those tactics adds another weight, and they all start to add up.
And wasn't there something in the study about certain factors being more predictive of a grandparent's well-being in these situations?
Yes. The researchers did some statistical analysis and they found 4 key predictors: the grandparents' relationship status, their age, whether they experienced brainwashing of the grandchild, and whether they were denied access to information. Those 4 things were really key.
So those are the things that really make a difference in how a grandparent is able to cope.
Yes, they really stood out as being significant.
And it's interesting because it's not just about the alienation itself. It's about the specific circumstances surrounding it.
Exactly. And you know what else they found? Something a little bit hopeful, actually.
Oh, what's that?
Well, it seems that having a partner can actually make a difference. It's like having that support system, someone to lean on when things get tough, can really help a grandparent through this.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Just having someone to validate your feelings, to remind you that you're not alone in this.
Yeah, exactly. So even though this whole thing is incredibly painful, there are some things that can help.
So knowing how much these grandparents are going through, what did the research say about how they try to cope? Do they seek out help? And if they do, does it make a difference?
Well, the good news is that over 500 of the grandparents in the study did reach out for some kind of professional support. Some went to therapy or counseling, some found comfort in their church or with their pastor, and some joined support groups.
That's really encouraging. It shows that they're not just suffering in silence, that they're actively trying to find ways to deal with this.
Exactly. And, it's important to be realistic about what that help can achieve. The article points out that reunification with the grandkids isn't always possible, even with professional support.
Right, it's not a magic fix.
Nope. It's often more about helping the grandparents manage the emotional fallout, the grief, the anxiety.
Because I can only imagine how much self-blame must get mixed up in all of this.
Oh, absolutely. And the research shows that counseling can be really helpful in that regard. It can validate their feelings, it can teach them coping mechanisms, and it can normalize their experience so they don't feel so isolated and alone.
Yeah, because I'm sure it's easy to feel like you're the only one going through something like this.
Right. And one of the main goals of therapy in these situations is to help the grandparents reach a place of acceptance. Not acceptance of the situation as being okay, but acceptance that this is the reality and that they can't control other people's choices.
And that's got to be so hard, letting go of that hope that things will change.
It is. But sometimes letting go is the only way to find peace.
There's a quote from one of the grandparents in the article that really stuck with me. She said, "Counseling was more about acceptance of the loss. Experiencing grief at the loss of my husband was difficult, yet this grief is the most difficult."
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, it really shows how deep this pain goes. And it's not just a simple sadness. It's this complex grief that comes with not knowing, with feeling helpless.
It is. And as the research highlights, Therapy can help people process those feelings, reframe their narrative, and let go of that self-blame. It can also help them find ways to honor their grandchild from a distance, to find ways to hold on to those memories and keep that love alive, even if they can't be physically present.
I think that's so important, finding ways to still have that connection, even if it's not in the way they'd hoped.
Absolutely. And it's about finding ways to cope with the emotional roller coaster that comes with this kind of loss. It's about learning to manage those feelings of grief and anger and sadness.
So, taking a step back, we've talked about the specific experiences of these grandparents, but this isn't just an isolated thing. The article mentions how much the grandparent population grew in the early 2000s, and we already talked about how estrangement between adult children and their parents is on the rise. This all points to grandparental alienation being a pretty big societal issue, and it seems like it's only going to become more common. What do you think is going on in society that might be contributing to this trend?
That's a great question, and it's one that researchers are still exploring. I mean, you could point to a lot of things. There's this increasing emphasis on individualism in our culture, changing ideas about family obligations and boundaries. Even social media could be playing a role, giving people new ways to disconnect or to amplify conflicts.
It's like all these different threads weaving together to create this situation where family relationships are becoming more and more fragile.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about individual families, it's about these broader cultural shifts that are impacting how we view family and relationships in general.
And for anyone listening who's thinking about this, the article has a really important suggestion. It encourages people to look inward and consider their own role in any family conflicts they might be experiencing. It's not about blaming yourself, but about understanding what you can control and what you can't.
I think that's such a crucial point. It's about taking responsibility for your own actions and how they might be impacting the people around you. And it's about recognizing that sometimes, despite our best efforts, we can't force other people to change.
So true. So as you're listening to this, maybe think about those relationships in your own life. What are some subtle ways that things can start to get strained, especially across generations?
Yeah.
And what are some proactive steps you can take to build and maintain those connections before they reach a breaking point?
I love that. It's all about being mindful of those dynamics, about communicating openly and respectfully, and about being willing to put in the effort to nurture those bonds.
So to wrap up our deep dive today, we've learned that grandparental alienation is a very real and incredibly painful experience. It involves these specific tactics that are used to create distance and break down relationships. And it leads to this unique form of grief that's called ambiguous loss. It's not the same as grieving a death, but it's a profound loss nonetheless.
And it's important to remember that even though reunification isn't always possible, there is help available. Seeking professional support, like therapy or counseling, can be incredibly valuable in helping grandparents cope with the emotional fallout and find ways to move forward.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the individual grandparents. It's about recognizing that these healthy intergenerational connections are so vital to the well-being of families and communities as a whole.
I completely agree. We need to be having these conversations, raising awareness about this issue, and working to create a culture that values and supports strong family bonds.
So as a final thought, I'd like to leave you with this. Given that estrangement within families seems to be increasing, what do you think is happening in our society that's contributing to this trend? And what are the long-term consequences of this for how we view family and the role of grandparents in our lives? It's a big question and one that deserves a lot of thought and discussion.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's something we all need to be thinking about.